In a shadow-choked forest where ancient trees claw at the murky sky, the air hangs thick with mold and moss, casting an ominous, foreboding pall over the scene. In a nightmarish realm where danger lurks in every shadow, the protagonist is slammed to the ground by a grotesque, razor-fanged monster, its arm impaled by a bloodied knife as an unspoken terror fills the air with the sense that such bizarre creatures exist nowhere else. Pinned to the ground as liquid streamed across his face, the determined yet overwhelmed protagonist struggled fiercely, his frustration erupting as he cursed the situation under his breath. In the heart of a shadowy cavern, the determined protagonist stood his ground, tense and unwavering, as the monstrous jaws of a giant beast lunged open before him, prompting a guttural cry to escape his lips. Then, as blood splatters violently across the shadowed void, he faces the grim reality of his impending death with a surge of desperate resolve. And, jolted from that nightmare, he sits upright in bed, heart pounding as sunlight spills through the window bars, leaving him momentarily disoriented and gasping in the stark contrast between dream and reality. As the weight of those 12 years settles around him, his breathing grows heavier, and a sense of fatigue clouds his gaze, underscoring just how deeply time has etched itself into his spirit. Then, as the ache in his neck intensified, he silently cursed the relentless dream, its torment so vivid it convinced him of his own mortality. Then, pushing himself upright from the chair, he pressed a steady hand against a clutter of notebooks and papers, reaffirming with quiet determination that he was prepared to withstand the agony of death itself. Then, surrounded by the silent chaos of books and notices, he remained motionless, lost in contemplation as the question of what truly hurt him lingered in the air. Then, tilting forward with a strained expression, he acknowledged to himself how unbearably tired he felt, his exhaustion settling more heavily with each passing moment. Blood streaming from his wounds, he reels from the monster's attack, his pain sharpened by the hopeless knowledge that neither realm offers escape, only a relentless cycle of fear and survival. Haunted by the memory of the attack, he pressed a trembling hand to his stomach, silently admitting that any hope of restful sleep felt impossible amid the lingering pain and exhaustion. Gritting his teeth, he resolved inwardly that escaping the endless torment of that hellish dream was the only way to end his suffering. And, with the memory of that torment still sharpening his senses, he crouched deeper into the tall grass, tightening his grip on the sword as every fiber of his being recalled the rigorous training in weaponry, martial arts, swordsmanship, jungle survival, and military tactics that now guided his every move. Then, as the sharp blades of grass bristled around him, he braced himself to confront the threat ahead, the weight of those relentless years fueling his unwavering resolve. Determination burning in his eyes, he unleashed a powerful sword strike against his bloody foe, reflecting that these hard-won skills had begun to spare him from dying so often in his nightmares. Then, as the echoes of that hard-won defiance faded, the protagonist paused amid the looming shelves and boxes, his troubled thoughts returning with fresh intensity as he silently acknowledged that a deeper challenge still awaited him. As he lowered his trembling hands to his face, the exhaustion etched across his features deepened, and he admitted to himself that the true obstacle he faced was his relentless struggle with sleep. In response to his silent turmoil, the woman in the white coat leaned forward with sincerity, advising that discovering a personal passion could offer the peace and rest he so desperately sought. As her words lingered in the gentle hush of the office, the protagonist lowered his gaze, shadows crossing his face as he admitted to himself with quiet determination that there was something he wanted to do. In the dim glow of his small room, the weary protagonist gazed upward, his tired eyes reflecting a quiet desperation as he confessed his longing for just one peaceful night of sleep. Now, blood dripped steadily from his nose and mouth, tracing crimson lines down battered skin as he endured the pain in stoic silence, his resolve sharpening beneath each bruise. Reeling from the sudden agony, he staggered backward, his wide eyes searching the swirling shadows for any sign of what had struck him. As the shadows crept across his gaze and tangled hair brushed his cheek, he struggled to understand what was happening, voicing his confusion in a hoarse whisper. In a stark, silent room stained with tragedy, the protagonist lay motionless face down in a widening pool of blood, his lifeless form casting a grim shadow across the cold floor. On a cold, shadowed floor slick with blood, the wounded protagonist lay motionless, his body marked by pain and the grim weight of desperation. Moments later, the gentle clarity in his mind stirred a cautious wonder, as he tried to accept that peace and restfulness might finally be real after all this time. Then, through the blurred, eye-shaped haze of trees and sky, confusion took hold as he questioned the reality of his own mortality. As the gloomy, bluish sky pressed down through tangled branches, a dawning sense of recognition swept over him as he wondered aloud if this place held a deeper significance than he first believed. The nightmare he's been suffering for the past 12 years. In the dim light of a tense afternoon, the protagonist stood rigid and focused, his sharp profile suddenly shifting as a jolt of realization flashed across his face. As the monster's tongue flicked out just inches away, he pressed himself lower into the undergrowth, straining to remain undetected as the creature's cold gaze swept the shadows. In the shadowy gloom, a monstrous creature emerged into view, its many eyes gleaming as it revealed rows of jagged teeth and an extended, writhing tongue, casting an ominous threat over the scene. In the muted light of a somber clearing, the hooded protagonist stood beside the bleeding creature, his grave expression betraying a grim realization as he silently assessed that its blood loss was dangerously severe. On a cold, unforgiving floor stained with blood, the wounded protagonist lay motionless, his thoughts drifting to the desperate possibility that his life had finally slipped away. In the hush of a misty forest, the protagonist knelt beneath a towering tree, his thoughts clouded yet resolute as he quietly acknowledged that everything would change if this new truth held. In the heart of a shadowed, otherworldly forest, the cloaked protagonist stood resolute, a surge of determination gripping him as he acknowledged that his fate here would sever any hope of returning to reality. Shrouded beneath his hood, the protagonist's eyes blazed with determination as he silently vowed that, from this moment forward, this place would become his true reality. In the mist-shrouded forest, the cautious protagonist crouched behind a tree, every muscle tensed with determination as he assured himself that he understood this perilous place and exactly what he must do to survive. Then, as tension pulsed through his focused eyes, he silently reaffirmed his plan to avoid confrontation for now and slipped toward the brightest place he could find, trusting that monsters would shun the light. Then, as tension hovered in the air, his calm eyes remained fixed and unreadable, the silence deepening around him and amplifying the weight of his unspoken thoughts. In response, the blade trembled slightly in his grasp, uncertainty mingling with anticipation as he tried to decipher whether this unfamiliar feeling would drive him to attack or hold back. In the mist-shrouded forest where shadows loomed tall, the resolute protagonist tightened his grip on a scythe-like weapon, bracing for battle as he insisted to himself that fleeing was not an option. Suddenly, from the darkness, a massive lizard-like creature with piercing yellow eyes snapped its tongue out in alarm, its tense posture betraying shock at the unseen threat lurking nearby. Moments later, tightening his grip on the sword, he weighed the unease in his chest, uncertain if his alertness was a fleeting gift or a sign that something within had truly changed. From the swirling mist, a massive monster merged to block his path, its eyes locking with his as tension crackled between them in the shadowed forest. The creature's deafening cry sent tremors through the ground, forcing him to brace himself as fear and adrenaline clashed within his chest. Fueled by a surge of determination, he tightened his grip on the sword, silently steeling himself for the decisive strike that would mark the beginning of the fight. As the swirling cloak enveloped him, the protagonist fixed his gaze forward, vowing inwardly that he would endure whatever came next and survive. In a storm of motion and fury, the determined protagonist unleashed a powerful upward slash against the towering dinosaur, igniting a burst of energy and blood that electrified the air with raw intensity. As he lands his final blow, he quickly turns around to look at the defeated monster. In the heart of a shadowy arena, the strong and determined protagonist surged forward with fierce resolve, his fist crashing into the face of the towering beast as a raw cry of effort tore from his lips, igniting the air with intensity. In the heart of a shadow-drenched battlefield, the determined protagonist stood resolute, gripping his bloodied sword as a colossal, spectral presence materialized behind him, the air thick with tension and the promise of imminent confrontation. Suddenly, as the spectral presence loomed over the battlefield, several golden beams of light pierced through the turbulent clouds above, casting an ominous glow over the stunned scene. The protagonist proceeds to open up the monster's body. In the suffocating glow of blue light, the determined protagonist drove his blade deep into the sinewy mass, focus sharpening as resistance gave way beneath the weapon's relentless thrust. As the blade's momentum faded, his gloved hand closed around the glowing blue orb, resolve burning in his eyes as he stared ahead, ready for whatever challenge awaited next. He then holds the monsters close to his mouth. On a night crackling with tension, the determined protagonist sank his teeth into a mysterious, glowing blue object, wincing as blood trickled from his mouth and desperation sharpened his resolve. In the heart of a mist-shrouded forest, the determined protagonist paused above a fallen figure, his serious gaze shadowed by a sense of foreboding as he softly murmured his dismay. In the shadowed gloom of a brutal world, the wounded protagonist stared defiantly ahead, his bloodied face and fierce red eye burning with the unyielding promise that he would survive at any cost. In the suffocating gloom of a narrow chamber, the protagonist stood tense and resolute, his grip tightening around a dagger as he steeled himself for the imminent clash. Then, as leaves and light spiraled through the air, he turned his gaze sideways with unwavering determination, silently committing himself to seek a brighter path ahead. Then, as leaves and light spiraled through the air, he turned his gaze sideways with unwavering determination, silently committing himself to seek a brighter path ahead.